All right, Alexander, let's cover a story that we covered in a lot of detail about 2, 3 years ago on Trump, on the elections, on the Hunter Biden laptop, and on the 50 Intel officials signing a letter saying that that laptop was disinformation. Well, it looks like we now have the truth as to what happened with that document from these 50 Intel officials, of which Biden used a lot during his campaign to become president. We now know from private sworn testimony that former acting CIA director Mike Morrell said that the Biden campaign, specifically Anthony Blinken, who is now Secretary of State, back then he was working with Biden, approached him and asked him to organize 50 colleagues to sign a letter in 2020 claiming falsely that the emails from Hunter Biden's laptop, which was published by the New York Post, was Russian disinformation. What do you make of this revelation? A private sworn testimony from the
Yes.
former CIA director.
Well, it's the Steele dossier all over again, in the sense that the Steele dossier, if you remember, was represented to the world when it first appeared, and I'm talking about when it was published. I'm talking during the 2016 election, and then of course it was published directly after. It was circulated to the world as genuine intelligence, pointing to connections, collusion between Donald Trump and his campaign in Russia. And we subsequently discovered that the whole thing had been instigated and manufactured by Hillary Clinton's campaign. They funded it. They did it through the law firm. I can't remember the name of the law firm, but I'm sure you can. They got it all together. They circulated it through the media. And
Perkins
Coy. That's exactly the one.
Perkins
Yeah,
Coy.
absolutely. Perkins Coy. They arranged it that way. They got Fusion GPS to involved, and they circulated it in the media, and they used that to counter the effect of the WikiLeaks revelations about the way in which Hillary Clinton's campaign basically sabotaged Bernie Sanders' campaign with the collusion of the DNC. So that was what happened in 2016, 2017. And now it's the same thing all over again. We were presented at the time with this letter from these 50 intelligence officers talking, luridly about Russian disinformation, for all the hallmarks, as I remember, was the language of a Russian disinformation campaign, this laptop thing. And as you absolutely rightly said, just as Hillary Clinton used all that fake information, that fake intelligence that her own campaign had generated in all kinds of campaign appearances, and included the debates with Trump, to plug the collusion story. So Biden came along, and again, in debates with Trump, he said, this laptop bears all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation campaign. Only you don't go there. And just as in 2016, the internet giants fell into line, the social media giants fell into line. This time again, the internet, the social media giants fell into line once more. And sure enough, we discover that this letter is cobbled together by the Joe Biden campaign, by none other than Tony Blinken. And I mean, the more things change, the more they remain the same. It gives you a very clear, good insight now of the way in which the Democratic Party, the leadership of the Democratic Party, conducts politics in the United States today, how they run elections. They use the intelligence agencies. They use their friends in the intelligence agencies. Note that in this particular case, these are retired officers, and of course Mike Morrell is a retired officer, but this couldn't have been done without some assistance from the intelligence agencies themselves, because Remember, the FBI already had the laptop. They could have immediately issued a statement saying this Russian disinformation story is untrue. They would have known that it was untrue. They said absolutely nothing. So there must have been confidence within the Biden campaign that the FBI wouldn't contradict this letter. So again, the Democratic Party used its connections, its links within the intelligence agencies to sabotage an election win, a potential election win by Donald Trump. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so what happens next? I mean, okay, obviously nothing's going to happen to anybody. That would be my thinking. Nothing's going to happen to Blinken. Nothing's going to happen to Biden. The Republicans are not going to do anything. This is the cynical side of me, but I still hold out some hope that something is going to happen. I mean, you can't let this go on over and over again. You said this is what the Hillary Clinton campaign did. This is what the Biden campaign did. Is this what the Biden campaign's going to do in 2024 as well, when more dirt about Hunter or who knows what else comes out? Are we going to run the same thing over and over again? Because we are at a point right now, Alexander, where these same people are lying to the American public every single day about what's going on in Ukraine and what could possibly go on in China. And the stakes cannot be any higher than where we are right now. I mean, we're possible World War III, and these are the people that are taking us to this catastrophe. And there is a large portion of the American public, the Western public, that actually believes people like Blinken still.
I'm afraid
even
you're
though we have
right. We have the proof. No, you're absolutely correct. Now, sooner or later, if a disaster is to be avoided, I mean, I don't mean all kinds of very, very bad things have happened already, but a final cataclysmic disaster, the extreme end of nuclear war, but eventually perhaps a collapse of the American political system. I mean, that in itself would be a disaster, maybe not quite on the scale of a nuclear war, but a significant disaster nonetheless. If a disaster is going to be avoided, there has to be a reckoning. Because unless there is a reckoning, not only is this sort of thing guaranteed to happen again, it will happen more and more, and it will get worse and worse. I mean, the Steele dossier, let's remember, well, it was all done initially behind the scenes. This letter was, brought out into the open. I mean, it was an even more blatant use of, the sort of instrument of dirty tricks and the capture of the intelligence agencies to pursue a political agenda than the Steele dossier story was. I mean, and remember, the same people are involved. I mean, Jake Sullivan was involved in Hillary Clinton's campaign. He's involved in Joe Biden's campaign. All right, on this occasion, it was Blinken who was the point man, but Blinken was all round in 2016, and he's a friend with Sullivan. So you see, you can see how this all works out. So of course they'll do it again, and they'll do it more and more, and politics in the United States will become less and less real in terms of people really saying what they actually believe. Because how could those 50 people, senior experienced intelligence officers, have generally believed that this laptop was a Russian disinformation thing? I mean, it's inconceivable, I think, that these very experienced people believed that. Just saying. So people in the political system will no longer say any longer what they believe. Standards of honesty will finally collapse. The United States will become a totally dysfunctional state. And, corruption, which is already out of control, will become systemic. So there has to be a reckoning one day. Now, How that will happen, how it will come, I don't know. But there has to be a reckoning. Yeah, that's a very interesting program yesterday with Mike Adams, you remember? Which we discussed some of the things that might happen. And, one can see that some of the more way out things that people are talking about, secession of some states, something like that, sooner or later, if this continues, something like that will come. It is inevitable. Unless the political antibodies within the political system eventually themselves assert themselves, unless we have proper investigations, which would require a proper Congress to be elected, interested in conducting those investigations, unless we had a president who took an interest in conducting these investigations, unless we have, and it has to be the Republican Party, a proper Republican Party organized across the country, able to ensure those elections work and work properly. Unless all that happens, as I said, the United States is heading for a massive smash.
Yeah, and just a final point there is these intrigues, these plots that they put together. There's so many problems with them. It's so wrong on multiple levels. But one part of these intrigues and these schemes that really gets me is they involve other countries and they bring them into their schemes. They demonize these other countries. For example, Russian disinformation, or Trump at a hotel in Moscow and the P-tape, or a Chinese balloon, or whatever else they put together. And they bring these other countries into these intrigues. They demonize these countries, and then before you know it, you have a conflict with these countries, and people actually buy into the demonization of these countries. That, if you're Russian, if you're the Putin government, one day you're looking after your country and you're doing what you do, and then the next morning you wake up and all of a sudden 50 intel officials say that you're meddling in the U.S. elections, or that you control Trump because Trump was staying in a hotel in Moscow some point in time and he had some call girls and he peed on a bed. I mean, it's crazy, but look at where this has brought us.
Absolutely,
look at where this has brought us and how many millions of people have died because of these ridiculous intrigues, when at the end of the day, all these intrigues are just about holding on to power.
Yes. That's entirely, you're completely correct. And it's incredibly reckless. It's unbelievably dangerous. And by the way, you're totally right. If we not had Russiagate, we would not have had the war that we have in Ukraine now. I mean, it is as simple as that. It's inconceivable. I mean, we would have had a different policy from the US government. We would have had different relations between the United States and Russia. Russiagate is at the core of this. And this affair with Biden and the laptop is making all that even worse. And, I think China played a more active role in involving itself in US politics than Russia ever did. But I completely agree with you. That doesn't mean that it's justified using whatever the Chinese may or may not have done as a tool in American political conflicts, electoral conflicts. Doing that is outrageous. It never used to happen before. I've never remember it happening.
Did it not prevent Trump from any type of diplomacy with Putin? Yeah, it totally prevented Trump from having any dialogue with Putin. Can we not say that the whole balloon incident that happened just a month or two ago prevented any type of dialogue with China? I think it did. I think that ridiculous incident about some stupid balloon traveling over the United States actually prevented any type of dialogue with China, and now look where we're heading.
Well, indeed, absolutely. There's no contact between China and the US at all. The Chinese were infuriated by it. They saw all those comments that Biden made in the Congress, and they're not picking up the telephone when the Americans try to call, because they've now had it up to there with the Americans. And, their patience is shorter, frankly, than the Russians is, because they're stronger. So, they won't talk to Blinken. They won't allow Blinken to come to China. They won't speak on the phone to Biden and Austin. They are furious. And Yellen tried in an overcomplicated way to make things better. But when you analyze her speech carefully, she said, decoupling from China would be a disaster for both countries. But even the Financial Times, was about as neocon an outfit as you can get nowadays, admitted that some of the things that she said about China are going to infuriate Chinese officials and are going to harden their feelings even further. And using great countries, big countries, powerful countries as tools in your political conflict is just a crazy thing to do. I say this once more. I remember American foreign domestic politics going all the way back to the 60s. I remember Nixon versus McGovern, for example, in 1972. And it's never suggested at that time that McGovern, say, was in the pocket of the North Vietnamese or anything of that kind. I mean, that kind of thing just didn't happen in American politics in those days. Nobody suggested it. Nobody suggested that, Senator Fulbright, for example, who was a major supporter of détente, was somehow run by the Soviets. I mean, nobody seriously suggested it. Maybe there were some lunatics who did. But it was never part of the political system. It was a profoundly un-American thing to do. People understood that there were differences, that people had different views about things. Sometimes people disagreed fiercely about those things. But people weren't on the hunt always to fabricate. It's important to stress this. Fabricate, to invent connections with outside powers which they knew never existed. This is something very new that's come into American politics, and it's a very dangerous thing. It's an appalling thing to do.
Yeah, they're just such children. They really are. I mean, you read about all their little schemes and these Steele dossiers and 50 intel agents, and Blinken approaching the CIA directors. Just, these are children. These really are children with just way too much power. And I just don't know who's going to sit these children down and just be rid of them or discipline them. I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, how do you get out of this mess? Because it is a complete mess and it's tearing apart the United States.
Absolutely. Well, since you brought that up, which do you consider more serious? Blinken going along, talking to Morell, and then organising a letter by 50 intelligence agencies, 50 intelligence agency ex-officials, telling something which is completely untrue, so that the president, the future president, can hide in debates with his opponent during an election, or a payoff by a sleazy lawyer to two women who claim, probably falsely, that they slept with another candidate. I mean, the one notice is the result has resulted in charges. The other hasn't.
Other countries don't act like this.
No.
I mean, is this the democracy that they're always lecturing the world about?
No.
Is this it?
I mean,
Blinken going to Morell. This is the democracy that they're lecturing everybody about, on and on. And I can't think of a country that acts like this.
No, I can't.
That does these types of things.
No, I can't think of one. I simply can't. I mean, I'll give you an example, a good analogy, a possible analogy, which is Jeremy Corbyn. It was very well known that the intelligence agencies didn't like him when he was leader of the Labour Party. And there were some weak attempts to try and prove that he had some connections. I think it was with Czech intelligence or something of that kind. Anyway, they were immediately exposed and ridiculed in Britain. Nobody seriously questioned that he was innocent of these things. And that whole thing fell by the wayside. And the Conservative Party never joined in. One Conservative MP, I think, did float these things and paid Corbyn substantial compensation. Because politics in Britain, even in their current deeply decayed and corrupt state, have not sunk to this level. But in the United States, they have. And that is something that Americans need to be very, very concerned about.
All right. We will leave it there. TheDurand.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, and Telegram. And go to the Durand shop. 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. Take care.